I intend to live until I die. And that's a critical decision that aging people have to make in the ageism of American society. For many of us, we are encouraged to look at roughly the age 65, not only as retirement age from our professions, but basically retirement from our lives. If we're lucky, if we have the financial resources and the good health to go off someplace and live in an aging ghetto and just sit around and wait for death. Well, that's not my approach to aging. It's not avoiding death, and it's not engaging with my mortality, because I absolutely feel that that's essential. At this age, we have to deal with the fact that, yes, we are going to get older, and yes, we are going to die, because death is a part of life. And I wish that we felt more comfortable talking about that. But until I die, I'm going to live. That means I'm going to function to the limits of my capacity, and I am going to actively be involved in my life and what's going on around me. So that's where my activism comes from. The fact that I want my legacy to be more than my butt print on the sofa in the TV viewing room. I want people to say, boy, that guy went until he stopped, because that's a full human life. I had the good luck to be born to a wonderful family. I had terrific parents and a wonderful maternal grandfather. So they were the lights of my life. Close-knit family. We had Sunday dinner with the extended family at my grandfather's. He was the great family patriarch. And so I remember childhood just being full of love and encouragement. I'm African-American religious royalty because my grandpa arrived in Chicago in the mid 1890s, immediately after the World's Columbian Exposition. And so my maternal family is one of the founding families of Pilgrim Baptist Church, which, as you know, is internationally known as the home of gospel music. Thomas A. Dorsey and Mahalia Jackson and all of those people were part of my family's association. My father's family was part of another old line Baptist church, Progressive Baptist Church, which is that large church that you can see from the expressway. And Progressive also happens to be not only my paternal family's church, but is currently known as the home of Jennifer Hudson. You have to understand that at the time that I was born, gay or any issues of sexual and gender minority communities was not part of the public narrative. It wasn't something that was discussed. There were no SGAs, no pride flags, no celebrations. And so literally, people who were born at the time that I was born, there were many of us who realized that we were different, but we didn't know how. We couldn't put our fingers on it or whatever. You just sort of felt just a little different. And so what I did was what many people who would later come to identify as gay or some other part in the sexual gender minority community, I lived a heteronormative life. I have girlfriends of like girls all my life. I dated, I went steady, and I even was engaged to be married before an incident in my life clarified exactly what that slight difference was that I felt. It wasn't until I was 18 years old, this man opened the door, and I had what I refer to as a Disney moment, because all of a sudden he's standing there and there's like music floating in the air. There's butterflies and birds. I mean, and although that was the age of LSD, I wasn't on anything, but I'm like, what the heck is happening? And then I realized, because I felt just out of nowhere an intensity of emotion that was different from what I felt for my fiance. And of course, I've always been a very realistic person. I recognized what it was. So I went back to my room and I had about a 4-hour intervention session with myself. It's what Black people call a come to Jesus moment. And in my come to Jesus moment, I cried, I prayed, I had a very confrontive conversation with God, because I'm like, my God, after everything I've been through, I says, isn't being Black enough? Do I have to be gay too? And as a result of that time, one of the first things that I did was to talk to my fiance and say, we can't do this. And she says, but it's okay, we'll be fine. And I says, no, we can't do this. And this is why. I can't promise you that 30 years from now, I can be to you what your father is to your mother or what my father is to my mother. And so I want you to have the opportunity to have a full life so that the man in your life is who you fully and reasonably should expect him to be. And I can't promise that I can be that, so we can't do that. In that time of self-assessment and all, I began a process for the first time that I would use all my life, which is to use one set of oppressions to inform the other set. And so there were things that I knew about being Black. I knew that that had not been a choice, that had been an accident of birth. I knew that society said that because I was Black, that I was not valuable, that I was less than human, that I had no right to occupy the space that I did. And, we received very hateful messages from general society. But I knew that in order to be a complete person, I had to challenge those events and find a place where it was safe and rational and secure for me to be Black. And then I thought about that in terms of being gay. Again, no choice. I don't remember any lines before being born where you stood and says, oh yeah, I'll volunteer to be a Negro, no problem. Or I'll be gay, not a problem. We don't have those choices. We are who we are. We cannot let the world defeat us and make us feel less. When people want to ask, where do all of those gay people come from? Well, they come from all those straight people who keep having them. I never had a formal coming out in my family, and I will tell you why. My family value that was passed down from generation to generation from that great-grandfather, the grand patriarch, was that my family believed in what we call the divine stewardship of parenthood. And what that means is that your children are not yours, they're not your property, but they are entrusted to you by God himself. And this is whether your children are biological children or children of choice. You are entrusted with them, and your job is to nurture them, to accept them as they are, the people that they were born to be, and that you love them unconditionally. And that was the kind of parenting that I received. So I didn't have to come out. My parents were always aware. And later on in life, when we were having formal conversations, because I engaged in elder care for a total of 30 years with both parents. And we had real conversations in that process. And when I asked about being gay, my mother said, we knew who you were. We knew. And they probably did. They probably knew before I did. But that didn't matter to them because they were my parents and they had that obligation as parents and they lived it and they lived it well. For my whole life, while I didn't know as a child that I was gay, I did know that what I wanted to do someday was to be a dad. That was very important to me because of the modeling that my dad did and that my grandpa did. So that was masculinity to me, to being a good dad. And I thought in coming to realization of my sexuality that that opportunity had passed. And then all of a sudden it re-presented itself and it was a possibility. My sons, who are the biological children of a first cousin, were in the care of an aunt. And she was having that experience that many women have of being grandmothers who are now raising their grandchildren. It was most unusual for a single father, a single African-American father, and a gay man to be allowed to either foster or adopt children. I simply said, well, tell her to bring them here. I'll take them. And that's what happened. So that was my 5-minute pregnancy. And the next thing I knew, I was a parent. I will never forget this conversation near the end of my mother's life when I said to her, I said, Mom, I need to ask you this question, not because I don't know the answer already, but simply because we are having all the conversations now. I don't want to make any assumptions about anything, but this is my question. I says, I know that you are a woman of faith and of practice. We've been in church all of our lives, the whole thing. And I says, I need to know. I need you to speak to this because we've never spoken to it directly before. Not because of not wanting to deal with it, but simply because you've always demonstrated the answer. But my question is this: does my sexual orientation, does that compromise your religious values? And my mother looked at me as if I had lost my mind. And she said simply, you are my son. And that was the end of discussion. I had to leave the South Side. My mother had passed away. It was just too much, too many memories. I couldn't deal with my grief in that space. My question for the first time in my life became, where can I live as a single gay man? Now of my age, I was just in the process of turning 65. And I started to commute here to the Center on Halstead for senior programs. And while I was doing that, they announced the development here was completed and they hosted a lottery. And I submitted my name to the lottery and I was one of the original residents selected. So had I not had this experience of living in a safe, clean, culturally supportive place, I don't know what would have happened to me. There are over 55,000 LGBT elders who do not have culturally supportive housing, who oftentimes have to go back into the closet to receive housing and housing services. Everything that I've been able to do in the 9 years, the public advocacy that I've been able to do, the positions that I've been able to hold are all because of the providence of my being here. We're all aging from day one. And so we don't need to arbitrarily cut off people at the age of 65 and pretend that they are different than others. The values that we serve are intergenerational. What I have to offer young people is life experience, history, lived history, and the observation and wisdom that comes from living.
Next week in West Lawn, a man who grew up in and under the mall.
I went from a kid to a man, and it was the greatest experience of my life.
From Superphonic Studios, this is Chicago. Listen every Sunday.